I want you to just imagine for a second the actual physical reality of an industrial forging floor.
Oh, it's intense.
Right. Like, picture a piece of raw steel, and it's glowing this furious, blinding orange color.
Yeah, pulled straight from a furnace running at, what, over 1,000 degrees?
Exactly. And then picture this mechanical press. And we're talking about a machine the size of a 3-story building, just slamming down on that glowing steel.
With thousands of tons of pressure.
Yeah, sheer, unyielding pressure. I mean, the ground beneath your feet physically shakes. The air in the room pulses.
It's essentially a localized earthquake.
It really is. You are witnessing raw, brutal kinetic energy bending metal completely to its will.
And, it's a violent environment. There's really no other word for it. You're literally watching the fundamental elements of the earth being forced into new shapes.
Right, but here's the twist. Take that image of pure, unrestrained violence and pair it with the need for, like, microscopic perfection.
Which is the hardest part.
Exactly. Because that steel being pounded into submission has to eventually become the beating heart of a 40-ton commercial truck or, a heavy-duty tractor.
Yeah, we are talking about internal engine components where the tolerances are measured in fractions of a millimeter.
Right. If the final part is off by even the thickness of a human hair, that engine doesn't just run poorly.
No, it tears itself apart.
It literally destroys itself on the highway under the strain. And that unforgiving reality-balancing, earth-shattering pressure with absolute precision is exactly how a relatively quiet Indian manufacturer named Happy Forgings built this 45% market share stranglehold on the tractor industry.
The contrast there is what makes this entire industry so fascinating to me. I mean, you have this incredibly harsh manufacturing environment, but the end product has to meet specifications you'd expect to see in, like, aerospace or watchmaking.
Yeah.
And that tension between force and precision, that's exactly what separates the enduring businesses from the bankrupt ones in this space.
Well, we have a very comprehensive stack of sources in front of us today for you. We've got stock story reports, financial disclosures, market analyses, competitive landscape teardowns, all focused entirely on Happy Forgings Limited.
And it's a lot to go through.
It is. Our mission for this deep dive is to decode the anatomy of this challenger company. We're looking at a business that operates in a highly capital-intensive industry, yet somehow they've managed to build an incredibly resilient moat.
Right.
We need to figure out exactly how they did it. We need to see whether their recent growth is structural or maybe just a lucky cyclical upswing. And we want to understand what their highly ambitious and very expensive expansion plans mean for their future over the next 5 years.
Because when a company in the heavy forging sector decides to expand, I mean, the stakes are enormous.
Yeah.
They don't just hire a few more software engineers and, rent more server space. They are buying equipment that costs hundreds of crores and takes years to actually yield a return.
Right. They're placing huge bets.
They are making bets on what the industrial world is going to look like half a decade from now.
Okay, let's unpack this. If we pop the hood on a commercial vehicle or, like, crawl under a heavy-duty farm tractor, what are we actually looking at?
The heavy structural stuff.
Yeah, the sources list their core product lineup as crankshafts, front axle carriers, steering knuckles, differential cases, and transmission parts. These are essentially the critical joints, bones, and spine of the vehicle.
But there's a really crucial distinction here.
Right, because looking at the revenue breakdown, there is a statistic that completely upends what I thought a forging company actually did.
I suspect you are looking at the machining percentage.
Yes, exactly. If a company's called Happy Forgings, you naturally picture them just, stamping out those rough, glowing metal shapes we talked about and shipping them out the door on wooden pallets.
Right, just selling the raw iron.
But the data shows that approximately 88% of their total revenue comes from highly precise machine parts rather than just raw forgings.
And that is the crucial distinction you really have to internalize to understand their business model. They are not just a metal shaping company.
Yeah.
They are fundamentally a machined products company. They aren't just selling the shaped steel. They are selling the finished, polished, ready to install component.
To use an analogy, it feels like the difference between buying a rough block of marble from a quarry versus buying a finished statue.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Right, like anyone with enough dynamite and heavy machinery can blast out a block of marble. That is the raw forging. But the real value and the barrier to entry is in the sculpting. You charge a premium for the statue, not the rock.
And the sculpting in this context requires an entirely different set of capabilities.
Right.
Precision machining isn't just about owning a giant press. It requires deep process know-how across die design, metallurgical control, and heat treatment discipline.
It's extremely technical.
Highly technical. You are using computer numerical control, or CNC machines, to shave off microscopic layers of metal. You have to ensure that every single statue you carve is identical at a microscopic level.
Even when you're making tens of thousands of them.
Exactly, even when you are producing tens of thousands of them for a moving production line.
Well, let's talk about where those tens of thousands of parts are actually going. The FY25 and FY26 end market numbers show a very specific concentration.
Yeah, they do.
Commercial vehicles make up about 37 to 38% of their revenue. Farm equipment and tractors are right there as well at 32%.
Right.
Then you have industrials at 14%, off-highway vehicles sitting at 11 to 12%. And passenger vehicles, like regular everyday cars, are a tiny fraction, just 4 to 6%.
Barely a blip.
Yeah. And geographically, it is a heavily domestic play. Roughly 88% domestic India and 12% exports.
So you have to ask yourself why they would choose that specific mix. Why avoid the passenger car market entirely?
Which sells millions of units, right?
Exactly. Millions of cars. Why focus so heavily on commercial trucks and tractors instead?
Well, I would guess it has something to do with the stress levels the parts endure. I mean, a passenger car spends most of its life parked in the driveway or sitting in stop-and-go traffic.
Precisely. Commercial vehicles and tractors are strategic, highly durable end markets. These machines operate in environments where components undergo extreme, continuous stress.
Right. A heavy commercial truck is on the highway essentially 24/7, hauling max capacity loads.
And a tractor is dragging heavy steel implements through dense, unforgiving soil, dealing with constant torque and vibration. Because the physical stress is so high, the parts must be utterly flawless.
And the economic cost of a failure in those markets is just completely different.
Totally different.
If my car breaks down, I take a cab to work. It is annoying, but fine. If a transport company's truck breaks down on a rural highway, they miss a delivery, they pay penalties, the driver is stranded, and the truck isn't earning revenue.
Yeah, or if a farmer's tractor snaps an axle during the harvest window.
Oh man, an entire year's crop could be compromised. Downtime in these sectors essentially destroys capital.
Exactly. The risk of component failure is economically unacceptable to the end user. Therefore, Happy Forgings has deliberately positioned itself in the segments where precision and durability are strictly non-negotiable.
That makes a lot of sense.
That is the arena where their high-value integrated machining capabilities can command the best returns. It really defends them against cheaper, lower-quality competitors.
But you and I can't just walk into an auto parts store and buy a Happy Forgings steering knuckle, right?
No, not at all.
They don't sell to the aftermarket consumer at all. Their clients are major original equipment manufacturers, the OEMs. We are talking about industrial giants like Tata Motors, JCB, Mahindra, and Ashok Leyland.
And this business-to-business, OEM-focused model fundamentally alters how the company operates compared to a standard retail or spot manufacturing business.
How so? Like, if I'm a manufacturer making steel pipes, I might sell them to whoever offers me the best price this week. Why is the auto OEM world so fundamentally different?
It is entirely program-based. In a standard commodity model, you're exactly right. You hunt for the best price on any given Tuesday.
Yeah.
But in the OEM auto world, a manufacturer like Mahindra doesn't just buy parts. They qualify a supplier for a specific vehicle program.
Okay.
So once Happy Forgings gets a part qualified for a new tractor line, they supply that exact part over the life of that specific machine's production run.
Which could be, what, years?
Yeah, which could be 5 to 10 years.
Wow. So it's an ongoing long-term marriage. It isn't a transactional one-night stand.
Yes, exactly.
Yep.
The OEM builds its own launch schedules, service networks, and warranty models around that specific vendor's part. It creates a tremendous amount of stickiness.
Right.
You are locked in, which provides great revenue visibility, but it also means the barrier to entry to win that contract in the first place is exceptionally high.
Okay, so we know they are deeply embedded in these long-term OEM marriages. To understand if this company actually has runway to grow, we need to ask, how big is the sandbox they are playing in?
Let's talk about the TAM.
Yeah, the total addressable market. The sources estimate the TAM for precision-forged components across India's CV, tractor, passenger vehicle, and industrial uses is sitting somewhere in the low tens of thousands of crores annually.
And it is important for you to understand how that TAM is actually calculated because it isn't just a simple multiple of truck sales.
Right. It's not just number of trucks times part cost.
No, it is built from the bottom up. Analysts look at the forging content per vehicle, meaning how much heavy steel goes into a modern truck versus an older one.
Okay.
Then they factor in the aftermarket replacement demand, because fleets do wear out over millions of kilometers. They look at the rising tractor mechanization rates in rural India. They factor in broader industrial capital expenditure.
So it's very comprehensive.
Very. You tally up the demand for all those high-stress components across the sectors, and you arrive at that figure in the tens of thousands of crores.
That is a vast market.
Yeah.
But historically, India's forging ecosystem has been incredibly fragmented, right?
Highly fragmented.
You had a few big players, sure, but there was a very long tail of smaller, unorganized or semi-organized roadside forge shops turning out lower-spec parts.
Right.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. The sources highlight a major structural shift happening right now. The unorganized players are getting wiped out, or at least pushed to the very fringes, and the tide is turning definitively toward the organized players like Happy Forgings.
Well, the demands of the OEMs have simply outgrown the capabilities of the unorganized sector.
Makes sense.
The large automakers are demanding tighter quality control, absolute traceability of materials, and a scale of production that a small regional Ford shop simply cannot provide or finance.
And it seems like government regulations are acting as a huge accelerant for this shift.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm looking at the introduction of the BSVI emission standards and the increasingly stringent safety norms across India. I mean, I understand why better emissions are good for the air, obviously.
Sure.
But why does a change in the exhaust standard force a change in the metallurgy of a crankshaft?
Oh,
What is the actual physical mechanism there?
it is a great question, and it gets right to the heart of the engineering. To meet the stricter BSVI emission standards, diesel engines have to burn fuel much hotter and leaner to reduce soot and particulate matter.
Okay.
To achieve that hotter, cleaner burn, the fuel is injected at much higher pressures, and the compression ratios inside the engine cylinders are increased.
Wait, so the explosions happening inside the engine block are literally more violent?
Exactly. The combustion forces acting on the pistons and therefore pushing down on the crankshaft are significantly higher in a BSVI engine than in older generations.
Yow.
If the microscopic grain structure of the steel in that crankshaft isn't perfectly aligned, or if there are tiny microfractures left over from a sloppy forging process,
It breaks.
yes, that violent pressure will eventually just snap the shaft in half.
Which means the OEM can no longer risk buying a cheaper, lower quality forging from an unorganized shop just to save a few rupees.
They cannot. The cost of a part failing in the field, combined with the strict warranty requirements and potential brand damage, makes it economically disastrous.
Right.
These regulatory ratchets actively favor organized, highly capitalized suppliers like Happy Forgings, who can guarantee metallurgical discipline through advanced processes.
So even if the overall pie of vehicle sales is growing slowly, the specific slice of the pie available to organized precision players is expanding rapidly.
Exactly.
The sources list several durable tailwinds driving this. You have commercial vehicle fleet renewal trucks physically wear out, and the government is pushing scrappage policies.
Yep.
You have tractor mechanization. As farm labor becomes scarcer and more expensive in India, the need for machines goes up.
Right.
You also have localization, where OEMs are desperately trying to shorten their supply chains and reduce reliance on expensive imports.
All of which provides a strong structural foundation for demand over the next decade.
I see the structural argument, I do, but I have to push back here.
Okay, go ahead.
Aren't vehicle production cycles notoriously cyclical? Like, this industry feels like it's inherently tied to a roller coaster.
It definitely has cyclical elements.
Right, a bad monsoon season hits rural incomes, and suddenly tractor sales plummet. Inflation spikes, interest rates go up, and large fleet operators delay buying new trucks.
Yes.
If Happy Forgings has over 70% of its revenue tethered to CVs and tractors, aren't they fully exposed to those violent macro swings?
That is a very valid challenge, and anyone looking at this space really has to wrestle with that cyclicality. The bear case definitely leans on that vulnerability.
Because the swings are real.
It is absolutely true that new vehicle production fluctuates with interest rates, monsoons, and overall economic sentiment. However, you have to look at the buffering mechanisms.
Okay, like what?
Well, while new sales swing up and down, the replacement demand acts as a shock absorber.
Oh, I see. So if a transport company delays buying a new fleet, Because financing is too expensive, they still have contracts to fulfill.
Exactly.
They have to run their existing trucks longer and harder.
Precisely. And running older trucks harder means they require more replacement parts, axles, driveline components, engine rebuilds, just to stay on the road.
Right.
This aftermarket demand provides a durable floor underneath the cyclical swings of new OEM production.
And going back to the regulatory aspect you mentioned earlier, safety and emission norms never go backwards.
Never.
The government doesn't suddenly say, you know what, let's go back to BSIV, it was easier.
No. Once a higher standard is set, the barrier to entry permanently rises. So while the sheer volume of the market will always have cyclical elements, the shift in market share toward high-precision, organized suppliers is entirely structural.
All right, so the market is shifting in their favor, but they aren't the only ones standing in the arena.
Far from it.
We need to look at who else is in the gladiator pit and how Happy Forgings protects its castle. Let's introduce the heavyweights.
Okay.
You've got Forge, which is the undisputed large-scale giant of the Indian forging space.
A behemoth.
Yeah. You have Ramkrishna Forgings, which is a major direct peer. You've got Sona BLW Precision Forgings, who are heavily into drivetrains and making a big push into EVs, and Craftsman Automation.
So if we position Happy Forgings within this hierarchy, it is critical to understand what they're not trying to be.
Right.
They're not trying to be Farad Forge. They don't currently have that vast global cross-industry scale covering everything from aerospace to artillery.
They're more focused.
Very focused. Happy Forgings is a strong niche to mid-size specialist. They have chosen a highly specific space and decided to completely dominate it.
And dominate they do. The research estimates they hold roughly a 30% share in the Indian commercial vehicle crankshaft segment,
Which is huge.
and an astonishing 45% share in tractor crankshafts. Almost half the tractors rolling off the lines in India are using their core components. It really is. But how do you defend a 45% market share in a highly competitive industry where procurement teams are constantly looking to cut costs?
You defend it by making it agonizingly difficult for the customer to leave.
Okay.
The switching costs in this industry are brutal. It is built around something called the Production Part Approval Process, or PPP.
Yeah, I saw that acronym in the sources. What does that actual process look like? If I'm Tata Motors and I want to replace Happy Forgings with a cheaper supplier, what do I actually have to do?
It is not as simple as signing a new purchase order.
I figured.
The new supplier first has to design the tooling, which can take months. Then they produce sample parts. The OEM takes those samples and subjects them to rigorous metallurgical audits.
Like in a lab.
Yes, testing them to destruction in laboratories. If it passes the lab, they run field performance validation.
With that.
That's where the part is put into a test vehicle and driven for hundreds of thousands of kilometers under extreme loads. And concurrently, the OEM's engineers will audit the new supplier's factory, checking their quality control systems, their sourcing, and their financial stability.
That sounds like a multi-year ordeal just to switch one component.
It often is.
Yeah.
And it costs the OEM significant engineering time and money to execute.
Right.
Once an OEM approves Happy Forgings to supply a safety-critical part like a crankshaft, they loathe the idea of changing suppliers simply to save a fraction of a percent on cost.
So the risk is too high.
Exactly. Because if the new, untested supplier's crankshaft fails in the field 6 months later, the engine dies, the truck crashes, the warranty claims skyrocket, and the brand reputation takes a severe hit.
The friction and the inherent risk of switching are just incredibly high unless there is a catastrophic quality failure or a severe supply chain disruption with the current vendor.
Exactly.
So the high switching cost is the primary mode. But the sources highlight two other pillars defending their business: their technology and process capability, and their structural cost advantage.
Let's dig into the technology first. It's deeply rooted in their vertical integration. We mentioned earlier that they are a machined products company. They utilize closed die forging, but crucially, it is integrated with captive machining and heat treatment all under one roof.
They control the whole thing.
The entire life cycle of the component.
Can you clarify the closed die part as opposed to what, just hitting it with a flat hammer?
Essentially, yes. In open die forging, you are pressing the metal between flat dies, shaping it roughly, like a blacksmith shaping a horseshoe.
Right.
But in closed die forging, the hot metal is placed between two custom-tooled molds, the dies that contain the exact negative impression of the final part.
Ah, okay.
When the enormous pressure is applied, the metal is forced to completely fill the cavity.
What's the advantage of doing it that way, besides getting a more accurate shape? Like, does it make the part better?
It alters the internal properties of the steel. Because the metal is forced to conform to the die under extreme pressure, the internal grain structure of the steel aligns to follow the contours of the component.
That sounds intense.
It is. This continuous grain flow dramatically increases the strength, fatigue resistance, and toughness of the part compared to a piece of metal that was just cast into a mold or machined from a solid block.
That brings us right back to the BSVI emission standards requiring stronger parts to handle the violent combustion pressures.
Yes, exactly.
The closed die process aligns the grain to handle that specific stress. And because Happy Forgings has the machining and the heat treatment in the exact same facility, that feeds directly into their third pillar, right? The cost advantage.
Precisely. Because they aren't loading these heavy raw forgings onto trucks and outsourcing the machining or the heat treatment to third parties, they eliminate logistical costs.
Right. Shipping heavy metal isn't cheap.
They limit handling losses, coordination inefficiencies, and most importantly, they don't have to pay the profit margin of an outsourced machine shop.
That makes total sense.
Once that fully integrated infrastructure is installed, it is exceptionally difficult for a smaller, fragmented competitor to match their cost per part without undertaking hundreds of crores in capital expenditure themselves.
But, no castle is completely impenetrable. The sources point out a significant vulnerability here, and it's sitting on the other side of the negotiating table.
The customers.
Yeah, the customer bargaining power is incredibly high. Even with that agonizing PPP process locking them in, Happy Forgings is selling to industrial titans.
This is a fundamental dynamic of the B2B auto supply chain. While Happy Forgings has built a formidable moat, their buyers are highly sophisticated and highly organized.
Right.
Companies like Tata, Ashok Leyland, or Mahindra conduct what they call annual cost-down negotiations.
Cost-down negotiation sounds like a very polite, sterile corporate term for, we are going to squeeze your profit margins every 12 months whether you like it or not.
It practically is a guaranteed margin squeeze.
Yeah.
The OEMs have deep, experienced procurement teams whose entire professional mandate is to demand continuous pricing discipline from their suppliers.
They know exactly what they're doing.
They know the game. They know that once a supplier like Happy Forgings has invested heavy capital in the tooling and the presses for a specific vehicle program, the supplier desperately needs the volume to justify the investment.
The OEM knows the supplier's trapped by their own fixed costs.
Exactly. So the OEM applies pressure. They might ask for a 2 or 3% price reduction every year, assuming the supplier will find manufacturing efficiencies over the life of the program.
So they just expect the supplier to figure it out.
Pretty much. Happy Forgings has to rely entirely on their integrated cost advantages, their low rejection rates, and their internal efficiencies just to maintain their margins in the face of this constant buyer pressure.
Okay, so we have a clear picture of their competitive reality, their integrated manufacturing, the high switching costs, and the ongoing arm wrestling match with powerful OEMs. Let's look at the financial engine of this company. We know we aren't going to spend time explaining the textbook definitions of operating leverage or how promoters align their incentives. You already understand those concepts. Instead, we want to see how these specific moats translate into actual rupees.
Let's break down the FY26 numbers.
Right. In FY26, their revenue hit 1,546 crore. That is up 9.8% year over year. But the number that really jumps off the page is the EBITDA, which came in at 471 crore.
Which implies an EBITDA margin of 30.4%.
In a heavy manufacturing steel conversion business, clearing 30% is a standout metric.
It's extremely rare. Many players in the broader auto ancillary space are happy to operate in the mid to high teens.
It is phenomenal. How are they pulling that off when they're constantly facing those OEM cost-down negotiations we just talked about?
Right. Well, we know they benefit from operating leverage, spreading fixed costs over higher volumes, but they must be doing something else.
Exactly, to push it past 30%.
It is a combination of volume and product mix. The operating leverage handles the fixed costs, the depreciation on the presses, the core plant labor.
Sure.
But the real margin expansion comes from pushing a richer mix of those highly machined premium parts we talked about earlier.
Ah, the finished statues.
Yes, those finished statues carry a much higher realization per kilogram than raw forgings. As the machined portion of their business grows, the overall margin profile of the company lifts.
They're generating excellent returns on the capital they deploy, too. The sources note a return on equity, or ROE, of 20.6% and ROC of 26.9%, adjusted for specific metrics in FY24.
In an industry known as a capital destroyer, achieving those kinds of returns is rare.
And how they structure the capital to achieve those returns is equally critical. Let's talk about the balance sheet because it looks incredibly safe.
Very conservative.
At the end of FY25, their gross debt was roughly 228 crore, but they were sitting on a liquidity buffer cash and equivalents of about 356 crore.
Which results in a near zero or effectively negative net debt position. Their debt-to-equity ratio is roughly 0.1x.
Why is that so crucial in this specific sector?
A pristine balance sheet is basically an offensive weapon in a highly cyclical, capital-intensive industry.
How so?
Well, when your competitors are burdened with high interest payments on heavy debt loads, a cyclical downturn in auto sales can completely crush them.
Because they still have to pay the bank.
Exactly. They spend all their cash flow just servicing debt. Happy Forgings, with negligible net debt and a strong liquidity buffer, has the flexibility to fund their heavy capital expenditure from internal accruals.
They aren't relying on dangerous borrowing to grow.
Right, and if a downturn hits, they can simply weather the storm or even use their cash to acquire distressed assets.
So what does this efficient financial engine mean for the next 5 years? Because they clearly are not sitting still.
No, they have a highly aggressive growth vector mapped out.
Right. They are planning a capital expenditure of up to 650 crore over the next 2 to 3 years. They recently commissioned a 10,000-ton forging press, and they have a 4,000-ton press planned to follow it.
Just to put that in perspective, a 10,000-ton press is a colossal piece of engineering.
I can't even imagine.
You don't just buy it and plug it into a wall. It requires specialized foundations, huge power infrastructure, and advanced material handling systems.
The sheer scale of the investment is significant, but the strategic intent behind this 650 crore capex is what we really need to examine.
Absolutely.
They are not spending this money just to make more of the exact same 30-kilogram tractor crankshafts, right? This expansion is fundamentally about premiumization.
Meaning moving up the value chain.
Exactly.
A 10,000-ton press unlocks the capability to forge ultra-heavy, complex parts weighing 250 kilograms or more.
Wow, that's heavy.
You are moving out of standard automotive components and into heavy non-auto industrial parts. We are talking about giant components for wind turbines, heavy oil and gas extraction equipment, railway bogies, and large-scale earth-moving machinery.
Which provides a dual benefit, right? It's not just higher revenue per part, it's diversification.
Yes. It allows them to diversify their revenue streams away from the inherent cyclicality of the domestic auto and tractor sectors.
Makes sense.
Furthermore, these heavier, complex industrial parts are exactly what international buyers in Europe and North America are looking to source from India as part of their China Plus One supply chain strategies.
Right.
So this capacity expansion is directly tied to their stated goal of expanding their export share, which currently sits around 12 to 15%. They want to take that number much higher.
Okay, so a 650 crore expansion plan moving into ultra-heavy components sounds incredibly bullish. It paints a picture of a company ready to dominate on a much larger scale.
It does.
But expanding a heavy industrial footprint is never without severe friction. Things can and do go wrong.
Always.
So what could break this story? Let's stress test the anvil and look at the risks and vulnerabilities hidden beneath these numbers.
This is where the analysis really has to look past the 30% margins and the pristine balance sheet to understand the structural risks.
Right. Let's start with the darkest scenario: cyclicality and capacity ramp-up. We know how operating leverage works. What happens if the commercial vehicle and tractor demand plummets exactly when these expensive new presses come online?
That is the classic industrial trap, the danger of severe underutilization.
It's terrifying.
We just discussed how their operating leverage boosts margins when volumes are high. Well, leverage cuts both ways violently.
Oh, yeah.
If macroeconomic demand drops, or if they simply fail to win the complex new industrial contracts they're targeting, they still have to record the heavy depreciation and fixed overhead on that 650 crore investment.
The costs don't go away.
Currently, they are operating with utilization headroom around 55 to 65%, which gives them room to grow. But if that utilization rate drops instead of rising, those beautiful 30.4% margins will compress rapidly.
They will be carrying the financial weight of a giant machine with nothing to feed it.
Exactly.
And What about the feed itself? Steel is their biggest single input cost. If the price of steel, billet, or scrap doubles overnight because of some global supply chain shock or geopolitical event, do they just have to absorb that loss and watch their profitability vanish?
Well, they don't absorb it permanently, but they do feel acute pain temporarily.
Okay.
The mechanism protecting them is a lagged pass-through agreement.
How does that actually work in practice with the OEMs?
They have clauses in their contracts with the major OEMs that allow them to pass raw material cost fluctuations down the line to the buyer.
That's good.
However, this pass-through is almost never instant. It usually happens on a predefined review cycle, often quarterly or semi-annually.
I see the problem.
Right. So if there's a sudden, sharp spike in steel, energy, or freight costs in January, Happy Forgings will experience a severe squeeze on their gross margins for several months until the contract review in April allows the new, higher pricing to kick in.
It creates short-term earnings volatility,
Yeah.
even if the long-term economics remain stable.
Yes.
So they can pass the buck, but they have to hold it while it's burning hot for a few months.
That's a good way to put it.
Let's look at the people they are passing that buck to. The customers. We know they have over 60 customers, which sounds nicely diversified on paper.
What?
But the sources show that their top 10 customers accounted for 66% of their revenues in the first 9 months of FY24.
Which is high.
Now, to be fair, that is down from 79% in FY21, so the concentration is improving.
Yeah.
66% of your business tied up in 10 buyers is still very heavy.
It is a significant vulnerability, and this brings us back to the risk of dual sourcing or outright program loss. We talked earlier about how agonizingly hard it is to switch suppliers due to the PPPAP process. But it does happen.
It's not impossible.
No. If a top OEM decides to shift a major vehicle platform to a competitor, like Ramkrishna Forgings or Bharat Forge, perhaps because of an unresolvable pricing dispute, a strategic mandate to dual source critical parts, or a rare quality failure, the volume shock to Happy Forgings would be immediate and severe.
Wow.
Losing a single program that represents 5 or 10% of your total revenue leaves a crater in your factory utilization that is incredibly hard to fill quickly.
And finally, we have to touch on the governance and management aspect.
Yeah.
Happy Forgings operates with a promoter-led structure, which is very standard in Indian industrial.
Very common, yeah.
But it always warrants careful scrutiny regarding key man risk. We know you understand the basics of management alignment, so we won't dwell on that. But the founder-centric nature of the operations is notable.
The objective reality is that the management's track record on executing these heavy capacity expansions and driving margin growth over the past decade is stellar. They have delivered on what they promised during their listing period. However, it remains an organization highly dependent on a small group at the top.
Meaning a lot of the strategic vision, the critical OEM relationships, and the execution capability are heavily concentrated.
Correct. As they scale into these complex, ultra-heavy components and attempt to break into highly competitive international export markets, the depth of their management bench below the founders will be severely tested.
That makes sense.
Any succession friction or strategic missteps could become major pressure points, especially if the business hits a cyclical downturn at the exact moment they're trying to integrate a 650 crore expansion.
So we have seen the flawless 30% margin engine, and we have mapped out the cyclical cracks that could completely derail it if the timing of their expansion is wrong.
We have.
How is the broader market weighing these two extremes right now? Let's look at the market's verdict. The bull versus the bear.
The market is currently locked in a debate over whether Happy Forgings represents a structural upgrade in earnings quality or just a very well-timed cyclical upswing dressed up as a long-duration compounder.
Well, I'll lay out the optimistic view, the bull case. The bulls see Happy Forgings as the precision compounder. They believe the company is successfully and permanently evolving from a cyclical domestic auto parts supplier into a diversified, global precision engineering platform.
The foundation of this bull thesis is execution and structural premiumization.
Right.
Bulls believe that the company will comfortably sustain late-teen volume growth over the next few years, which will easily absorb the new capacity from the 10,000-ton press without damaging margins.
Okay.
Furthermore, they believe the strategic shift toward heavier, highly machined industrial parts and a higher export mix will cement those 30% margins as the new normal.
So in this view, the high profitability is structural, driven by a permanent move up the value chain, not just temporary cycle timing.
Exactly.
Okay, but I'll counter with the pessimistic view. the bear case, the cyclical illusion. The bears argue that we are simply sitting at the absolute peak of a very favorable commercial vehicle and tractor cycle.
Right.
And as the saying goes, everyone looks like a genius at the top of the cycle.
The bear thesis points to the gravity of heavy industry. They argue that once tractor and CV demand normalizes to historical averages, the volume growth will inevitably stall.
Yeah.
And right when that revenue growth stalls, the heavy friction costs, the depreciation, and the interest, if any debt is used of, ramping up that 650 core capex will hit the income statement all at once.
That's a double whammy.
Exactly. When you combine slowing macroeconomic demand with rising fixed costs from new presses, those 30% margins will inevitably compress and normalize back to industry averages in the high teens. The bears argue the market is currently overpaying for earnings that are at a cyclical peak.
So for you listening, how do you figure out which side of that debate is right?
We need a cheat sheet.
We do. What are the key metrics you should track over the next few quarters to see if the bulls or the bears are winning the argument?
There are 3 critical, quantifiable variables you should watch closely in their upcoming disclosures. First, track their capacity utilization rates. Are they successfully filling the capacity of their new presses with new orders, or is that expensive machinery sitting idle?
Good point.
Second, monitor their export mix percentage. If their premiumization strategy into non-auto industrial parts is actually working, you should see exports steadily grow beyond that historical 12 to 15% range as they win complex programs in Europe or the US.
Right.
And third, watch their realization per kilogram. If raw material prices fluctuate wildly, does their realization per kilogram hold steady or improve? That will tell you definitively if they actually have the pricing power and the value-added product mix to defend their margins against those relentless OEM cost-down pressures.
Let's synthesize this journey. We started by visualizing the sheer, localized earthquake required to shape unyielding steel.
We did.
We watched Happy Forgings take that brutal force and combine it with microscopic machining precision to dominate the Indian crankshaft market, securing an astonishing 45% share in tractors.
Impressive numbers.
We saw a highly tuned financial engine operating at a rare 30% margin, insulated by a balance sheet with near zero net debt and a solid liquidity buffer. And now, we see a company standing at a critical crossroads, betting 650 core on a heavier, more complex, and more international industrial future, all while trying to outrun the inherent cyclicality of their legacy markets.
It is a textbook case study of a challenger company attempting to build an enduring multi-decade moat through disciplined capital allocation and integrated operational execution.
It really is. But before we wrap up, there's one final thread I want you to pull on.
Oh.
We spent this entire deep dive talking about internal engine components, drivelines, differential cases, and crankshafts. Literally the beating mechanical hearts of internal combustion vehicles. But the world is changing rapidly. Even in the heavy commercial truck and agricultural tractor spaces, there is a long-term structural push toward electric vehicles and alternative drivetrains.
And that transition changes the physical architecture of the machine entirely.
Exactly. The drivetrain of a heavy electric truck doesn't look anything like a diesel truck.
No, it doesn't.
An EV uses direct drive motors. It simply doesn't need a traditional forged crankshaft or complex multi-gear transmission parts in the same way. The entire mechanical ecosystem is simplified.
So true.
So the ultimate test for Happy Forgings won't just be how efficiently they can utilize a new 10,000-ton press to make heavier diesel engine parts or wind turbine hubs. The real existential test will be how quickly and effectively they can pivot the immense weight of that press and their entire precision machining ecosystem to forge the new, complex components required for an electrified future.
That is the true challenge hovering over their expansion plans.
It really is.
Yeah.
Something for you to keep an eye on as this industry evolves.
Because in the world of heavy manufacturing, precision isn't just about shaping the steel currently sitting in front of you. It's about anticipating the shape of the market to come.
Force and precision. It all comes back to that.